going to say we're at 8:01, so why don't we kick things off, Jenny, over to you to do our land recognition, and we can get into the conversation.
We can do that for sure. Let's just bring this.
And as Jenny's bringing that up, for those of you who have joined us, please familiarize yourself with the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and the chat at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions as we proceed through today, please try and put them into the Q&A section. Makes it much easier on our end to filter through it. And this group has been fantastic over the last few weeks, carrying on some great conversation in the chat, and I'll try and monitor that as we go ahead. So, but Jenny, sorry, over to you now that the slide is there. So.
No worries at all. And here's our view from campus if we were there and the sun was up. So it's an appropriate photo for us based here in Calgary. We know that some of you are joining us across Canada, possibly even beyond. But SAIT acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people from the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. For those of you who aren't in Treaty 7, Alberta covers 6, 7, and 8, and obviously our land stretch far beyond there. So thank you for taking a moment to just connect to the area and the land where you are today. For us, this is a traditional land, and it's a place where we all walk in the footprints of our Métis people.
Perfect. Thank you. And Brent, just because I saw it pop up, that's an F1 car. That's Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren car from the Monaco GP this year. So anyway, there's another sidebar. But actually, F1 teams do need a lot of collaboration to make things work. So why don't we take the segue that Brent provided, and the power of collaboration and the importance of collaboration, Jenny, for teams to actually be able to get things done, hopefully better as a group than they could as individuals. And what we were trying to lean into today a little bit was, how do you look at resilience on your team, or building resiliency? And so why don't we start there, maybe level set a little bit on individual versus team resilience. And folks, obviously, as we progress, again, feel free to add your questions or comments, and we will see where this takes us.
Excellent. You couldn't have transitioned that one better. That's kind of cool. So collaboration, as you can see, we're talking about social processes, we're talking about teams. And one of the things that's become apparent, this isn't possible unless we have that sort of nature of resilience. And resilience is one of those words that we bounce around, and that's a pun quite literally, a lot, and don't really understand. And so at its sort of rawest form, people say, oh, it's just the ability to bounce back. And actually it's an awful lot more than that. So if we start just with, as you said, let's touch base, individual resilience and team resilience. Now here at SAIT, you'll see down in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a partnership with the Resilience at Work team. So wherever you see that little symbol that's down at the bottom, this is a lot of their information in their work. We've several of us that are accredited in their area. So you can go, you'll find different definitions, all the rest of it, but the essence is going to be the same. On the screen, you'll see that definition of individual resilience. And what we know is that you can have a team of highly resilient people in terms of each individual has their resilience in a good place. So their own capacity for all those things that you see there is pretty good. What we want is that team to come together collectively to be able to manage the pressures, stay healthy, adapt to the change. We've talked about that lots, and sort of learn and get proactive so that they're ready for the next one that comes around. So that's the first thing. In fact, it's our big idea later on today, is that team resilience is quite different from individual resilience. And I'm just going to steal a second to show you the two models from Resilience at Work. So our individuals, we need these components. So if you're building it in yourself, these are the 7 pieces that we would be working on to build that resilience. There's another takeaway right there. We don't want to work on resilience when we need resilience. Resilience is something that we're working on all the time. And these don't all have to be super, super high. Think of it a little bit like a soundboard. It's very possible to have a couple up and a few lower, and then you change that according to what you need. More to our point for this morning, or where we thought we would start, is our team resilience model. Again, 7 components that make up the resilience of your team. And they're pretty straightforward. But here what we know is that if we're short in a couple, we start to see the impact of that. And we start to see teams perhaps struggle, get held back, get stuck. And so that would be sort of our starting place, if you like. 7 components, each one fairly straightforward, robust, speaks to shared purposes, shared goals, being proactive in that sort of area. Resourceful, we're talking about our processes. Can we prioritize? Do we know our team's strengths? I talk a lot about strengths these days. We're really good at what we're not good at. We're not brilliant at what we're strong at. Perseverance, can we keep going, persisting when we need to? Are we solution focused? Self-care, are we looking out for each other? Okay, it is much better to be able to look out for each other than lose people on leave for months. So what are the signs of overload? What does that work-life fit look like these days? Capability, we're looking at our capacity and how do we access other networks and resources, that kind of area. Connected speaks for itself, I think, that culture of belonging. And alignment speaks for itself again. Are we all aligned in the direction that we're heading in? There you go. That's my summary.
Excellent. So as a leader, then, when you're looking at your team, like, how do you know? So obviously you just said we want to be working on this all the time, just like I'm supposed to be exercising every day, but clearly it's not happening. But when you want to build resiliency, folks are going to walk away from today and perhaps take a look at their teams and go, are we resilient? Are we not? How do you, thoughts on how do you first of all start to identify this with your team, right? How do you take a look at the group and say, is this a resilient group? And then if you decide you really want to start working on it with your team, is it just as simple as saying, hey folks, we're going to become more resilient? Where do we lean into this with the group to start addressing it?
So the answer I want to give you is come and hang out with us at Satan. We'll tell you that's not what this morning is about. So how do we do that? We look at it. So we've got those 7 components. And I think when we're talking about team resilience, one of the best sort of directions is, as a team, what are the challenges that we're facing? What's going on for us right now? And we always come back to this. You're going to have the psychological safety, the ability to have the open conversations. But what are the challenges that we're facing? What are we looking for in terms of an outcome? And what does that look like? That would be the starting place. And as we start to unravel all of those challenges, I would suggest that some of these will pop up pretty quickly. We're going to start to see patterns in where we get stuck. We're going to start to see patterns in where our energy sags. We might even stop and look at it and say, this, we sound like a bunch of Eeyores around the table. What are we doing about this? Is this really the mindset that we want to approach these problems with? The other piece too, if you wanted to look at each component, there's simple stuff that you can do on each one. And that starting one, the robust one. So what's your shared purpose, your shared goals and values? One of the simplest things is to get your entire team to write down what they believe what they believe the purpose of the team is. That'll do. Or the 3 top priorities. And do it as a turn and learn. So you all write it down and then you turn it over all at the same time. So everybody gets their say. Nobody's waiting for the stronger voice to say something, or the louder voice, I should say, not stronger voice. All turn it over, and do we all agree? And if you all agree down to the letter pretty much, fantastic. We've got that one done. All right, that one's up. And so there's different ways. Depends on the time you've got, depends on how worried you are about it, and depends on your attention, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, obviously, like anything as a leader, what you focus on is what you will start measuring and recognizing the highs and lows of, so to speak. So thoughts on perhaps some of the nuance or complication in some of that work right now in this remote or hybrid environment, right? When you see your team every day, yeah, you might be able to get a better sense of where's the energy level, how folks are doing, and so on. We've touched on this before in some conversations about, needing to be intentional with checking in.
Yeah.
But I guess part of where I'm going with this too is, do you think teams have become more or less resilient over the past 20 months?
I think here's my cop out. I think it depends on the team. I can, what I can put, I've seen some that are just nailing it and some that are really struggling. So, and to put a number on there, I wouldn't have an idea. I think the ones that are doing better are the ones that have adapted, been a little bit more flexible. And let's take, this is a familiar example, but it's really key. So when we were face-to-face, you used to have those roundtable meetings and everybody brought an update to the table. So now when we're doing that virtually, what that looks like, in most cases, the cameras are off, somebody's giving their update, everybody else is probably taking care of email or something else, let's be honest. And that energy in that meeting is fairly flat. So if you want to go anywhere after that round table as a facilitator of the meeting or a chair of the meeting, you have some hard work to do. And what if instead of that round table, we had a channel in Teams? I read something the other day that talked about heartbeat moments for the team. Now, for some, that title will be dreadful, change the title. But what it was a channel in Teams. Everybody went in there. In this case, they went in every day. You don't need to do it every day. But they gave 3 things or, a small number of bullets. Here's what I've worked on today. Here's what I'll be focusing on tomorrow. So if you're the leader of the team, you've got what you need. You can report up. You can see where the obstacles are. Everybody on their team can see what each people are working on. Can I help you? Do I have information? But that's that piece taken care of. Now, when you're in the meeting, as a facilitator or chair, you can ask people's cameras on, depending on your company's culture and philosophy, etc. But the conversation changes. And with that, the energy changes. Mm-hmm. And so I think, some of it just comes when we're doing this virtual piece. You were spot on. The cadence of communication, those check-ins have to change. That's in that connection piece. Yeah. And how we do things. Let's just shift that slightly.
Okay. Yeah. No, and it's in the energy piece too. So there's a couple interesting questions here that I think Aman is a good one here. I think some teams were doing really well at the start when we were all thinking this wasn't going to last very long. As it's dragged on, change fatigue has set in, and kind of the energy level as you go through this will fluctuate, right? So there's 2 or 3 questions here I want to get to, Jenny. Ron has one here, is that, I get that we should have a common vision of goals for the team, and alignment is important, but if we all agree, is this not potentially a sign of groupthink? Wouldn't robustness require a bit of diversity and willingness to challenge amongst the team?
Yes, absolutely. But what you come out with needs to be shared and aligned. So the quality of the conversation is getting to that shared alignment or that shared goal, that shared vision. And if we do it as in, I'm the leader, here's what I think, and 1 or 2 people around that table of, let's say 5, 6, 8 say, oh yes, I agree, and then we're moving. Now we're pulling people with us. That's coercion. So in getting to that shared alignment, we're absolutely talking collaboration, which is where we started today. And how do we create space for everybody's voices? And when we create space for everybody's voice, the actual intention there is that we do disagree productively, have conflict, if you like. And at the end, we get to what we agree on, and we're together as we move forward. Hopefully that answers that bit.
Okay. No, I think that's good. Ron, certainly let us know if that kind of fell into what you were thinking there. Brent has a good question here as well, is that I understand that some team members discovered more psychological safety with a remote work environment, especially BIPOC individuals. In past sessions, you highlighted the need to investigate all assumptions, and I suspect this supports openness, trust, and resilience. it's a bit of a
Can
yes
I
or no
just answer
question, I
with
think.
yes?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think so, but yeah, I take a look at this and, yeah, I think there's some things to lean into, obviously, that we've ended up in this remote environment. And if some people are feeling more safe to be able to share, express because they are remote and can perhaps weigh in a different fashion than they would have in a live conversation. I think you have to figure out as a leader, how do you take that, right? We've talked in prior conversations too about how do you take the best of what's happened through this period and then help bring it forward into future operations, the way your team gets together and so on, right? What you don't want to do is kind of diminish what you've gained there by bringing everybody back into that live environment. Jenny, I don't know if you got thought on that.
Yeah. It really depends. We don't know where we're going next. A lot of companies don't even know where they're going next. I think if you're making the complete shift from virtual to back to face, there's that intentional conversation that we have to have in terms of what worked here. And if you've got more introverted people on your team who have shown different ways of telling you what they think, giving their opinion. There are some meetings where we've got cameras on, the chats on the fly, and you're grabbing information from lots of different places. If that was working well, you were getting more, how do we move that back into the face-to-face environment? And I think what we've become far more aware of is actually there are a lot of voices, and we're talking about autonomy for people. So how do we give that space? And maybe that's permission, and maybe that's a conversation. Jenny, I've noticed that you really take part within the chat. I don't hear your voice that often, and we're coming back to face. What can I do so that I'm still getting your ideas, your option generation, whatever that piece might be? And saying it again, have the conversation. And how will that work as we come back face to face? And if your cadence of communication has been good, that conversation probably isn't a difficult conversation. It's a support conversation. I've got you. And I want to make this work again within the conditions that have been put on us.
Yeah, I like that too. And I might even just tweak that sentence a little bit, Jenny, and say, how do we make sure the team is getting this information for you versus right? Because
of course,
obviously, yeah, semantics maybe, but I think that's an important one. So there's a few questions here I want to get through. So some of these may overlap, and if they do, I will try and edit on the fly. From Leah, to me, resilience seems to require a trigger or a challenge. Do you recommend creating some of these moments to train and test resilience if the team is doing work that isn't naturally challenged to the point that resilience may be worked on?
Ooh.
So I think what I'm hearing there is, how do you stress test your team to help them become more resilient? In perhaps in simplest forms, that might be. I get that from time to time. Yeah, you want to. For me, it's a concept of you don't grow muscle or so on without stressing it to start with, so it can then rebuild stronger. Right? Simple form. I'm not an anatomy major, but anyway, thoughts. This is an interesting question. Do you create moments to test and train and test resilience of your team?
It is interesting. My gut reaction to that is people are being tested enough at the moment. Do we want to add one more piece? However, I think the really interesting part of this is we want to build resilience all year round. So we want to set up to use that sort of speak, we want to set up the behaviors that work. And so one of the things that, is an easy conversation when we're not under stress is, what is our regroup, reset? What does that look like? So if we get thrown into crisis, whatever that might be, what will we do? How will we manage that? And if we talk about that when we're not in crisis, but we know what that's going to look like, it only takes one or two people to pull on it at that moment and say, we spoke about this. Here's what we said we would do. Can we put this into action right now? And we sort of reset that mentality. And you talked about at the beginning of the pandemic, we all went into overdrive and we had no idea the marathon we were set up for a sprint and a fight.
Yep.
And now we're tired. And there's a term for it, surge capacity. That's what our surge capacity is run out. So we all have this surge capacity that we can deal with this.
Yeah.
And now we're still dealing with it, and that's tapped out. And so that's harder. And so I think there's beauty in making the time to have the conversations. Yes, throw that challenge out there, whatever that might be. But also there's a need to have these conversations, not in stressful time, to say, what if we're faced with this again, what works? What can we expect from each other? And, I might put my hand up and say, I'm a worst case scenario person. That's not true, by the way. But, I might say that. And so you can expect to hear from me, the world is ending.
Yeah.
And I need pushback to what's in my control, what's the next step. Whereas somebody else might say, right, Jenny, I'm right there with you because I will see the best in this. I'll find the opportunity. So we're going to have a conversation straight away when this is hitting to realign, because you need to deal with the dragons and the demons, especially when they're right there on your doorstep. But you also need to have that strategy to move forward.
Very good. Leah, I hope that helped. Question from Andy. Do you believe resiliency has levels? In other words, there are resilient teams for daily work, but they may not be resilient in crisis or emergency management. Which is more important, selection of the individual or the training provided? Do you believe people can train to be resilient? So good on you, Andy. You snuck 3 questions in one, so I like that. So do you believe resiliency has levels, right? Are there resilient teams for daily work, but may not be resilient for crisis? So let's tackle that to start with.
Okay. I think this is a book of Jenny. This is not scientifically validated. I think that we have levels to the extent we can grow our team resilience, and a team that has been together for longer, if they're working as a team, not as a group, then we may see a different level of resilience. And I think that if we've got that level of resilience, we will do better in crisis. I don't see it as an A and a B.
Okay.
And that might just be the nature of the way I look at things is, we wouldn't get to crisis and just say, well, we're done. We don't have any resilience. We can't do this. We would try and make it work. But if we haven't paid attention to some of these components, we're going to struggle massively. Whereas if we're doing very well in the everyday work, that would suggest to me that we probably could make the time and have the inclination to build it for when we need it.
Yeah. It's actually an interesting concept, right? Because you don't get into a scenario and go, hey, who's got any resiliency left to work on this? Right?
Yeah.
Right. It's just a matter of are you or aren't you, or how well are you going to or not going to do it? I think is how it plays out. But it's not like you can say, yeah, I've got resilience left to spare.
There's a capacity piece in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Like, where's our capacity at? And sometimes within a team, it's just going to take a couple of people to say, what if, here we are again, what if, or we can if we look at it this way. And so now we're talking about that solution focus piece, and then we're moving forwards. And actually, I think that some of that generates an excitement. So it does for me. Like, we've got a challenge and we go through we can if. I think, there's a measure of how well does your team say we can if. Yeah. And that we can if might be right outside of left center. And it's crazy, but the more that we talk about it, that generates an excitement, that generates an energy. And now this isn't so bad. Yeah. And that builds in itself, that builds a resilience. So we're kind of building it throughout.
Yeah, it's interesting how that mindset is tied so, at least in my mind, tied so closely to resiliency.
Yeah.
Right. Positive mindset leads to greater resilience for the most part, right? So the second part of Andy's question, I think I can kind of combine, which is more important, selection of the individual or the training provided, i.e., do you believe people can be trained to be resilient?
I have to say yes.
Well,
You can't ask me that question. The answer is yes. Come. No. But the answer is yes. And it's not that we train. It's once we know, then we can make choices and then we can build it. And so let's go back to mindset, because I think you were onto a really good point there. When we talk in general terms, we talk victim mindset or owner mindset. Now, if you're somebody who naturally, whatever your story has been, says you come at this with a victim mindset every time, the sky is falling down, whatever that piece might be, then can you change that mindset? Yes, you can. Does it take sometimes a few strategies to help you how to do that? Yes, that comes from your training, but the doing it, the putting it into practice, that's a building skill. That's a learning piece. And what happens is you try it once, not too bad. You try it again, no, it doesn't work. It's much more comfortable to say this is awful and it's all woe is me. And then you don't like that feeling because you've had a little taste of the other one. So you try it again and you try again. So I think it's a combination of both.
Okay. So to kind of tie back to our kickoff conversation before we got going here, and TV shows, you're saying that Bob the Builder was onto something with yes, we can. When he says, can we build it? Yes, we can.
As long as he's realistic, yes.
Fair enough. Okay.
And I do know Bob the Builder.
Lots of shout outs here for the Book of Jenny, by the way, in the chat. People love the Book of Jenny. Question from Vis, and I'm sorry, I haven't pre-read this one. We might have touched on this already, but the importance of team resilience cannot be overstated. Any thought about leaders' resilience and how we develop, build, and support this, perhaps within the context of managing teams? Right. So we definitely haven't touched on this, right? So yeah, as leaders, we need to make sure that we're helping build our team's resiliency and capacity and so on. But as a leader, I think that's where this is going here. How do you make sure you're helping to support the resiliency of your leaders?
Yes. So, and that was one of the reasons that we started this morning with the individual resilience and the team resilience. And this is really important. And we've seen this over the past 18 months, especially. So as a leader, first off, you have to look after yourself. And we had those 7 components that were in the individual resilience, which will come out in the slide deck after this too. So are you looking after yourself, first of all? And then if your own resilience is strong, then you're in a position where you can help your team and build your team with this piece. And I believe we've said this a lot of times before too, you don't have to do this by yourself. Part of that connection piece is conversation. And a great place to start the conversation is to ask your team, how are we doing on these 7 components? Which goes back, actually, I think, Craig, to something that you asked at the beginning. Where do I start? Well, maybe the place to start is how do you, my team, feel that we're doing in these components? Which ones do you see as strong? Which ones do you see as weaker? What is leading you to say that? Now, when you do the resilience at work, we have inventories, we have measurements, and we have all the rest. So there is a formal way to play that piece. And we talk about individual resilience, and then we talk about leaders working with the team resilience, and how does that piece show up? How does that look? If you wanted to just do it by yourself, I think that would be a really good starting point. And then bring the team in. Like, self-care is a great place to start at the moment, because lots of people are not doing so well in that place.
No, 100%. And I think you touched on an important point. As leaders, we sometimes forget about, at least I know I do, right? You don't have to have all the answers as the leader. As much as I really want to have all the answers for my team, because it's not about, it's not about being the hero. It's about really just wanting to resolve and take issues off the plate for your team, right? But it's okay to go to your team and say, hey, what do you guys think? And I don't know, I throw that out there just because I think sometimes leaders get into the frame of, I have to have the answers, I have to have the answers, versus saying, I'm not sure, team, what do you think?
So I think there was a day when we did have to have the answers. I used to be a school teacher in England, and my job was to have the answers. And nowadays, it's not my job to have the answers. And there's as much wisdom in the room as there is coming from what I do know. And I think you lean in a really good point there, in that leadership now, Simon Sinek says it really well. Leadership used to be the people, you were in charge of the people. Now it's the people in your charge. And so that takes away, we don't have to have the answers, but we do need to be there for them. We do need to support, guide, lead, all of those brilliant pieces that we want to look at. And you're right, it's okay. I don't have these answers. And what do you think? And 9 times out of 10, there'll be a lot of thinks around that table. Well, now we're right back to collaboration, which is where we started this point. And within that, there's an energy, and energy is contagious. That's another really important piece of resilience, is that we do catch the energy around us. Yeah. And then there's also that ability to look outside the box. And we've shown that we can do that. And I think teams are getting more excited about doing that, or more willing to do that. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think you just touched on one question that just came in here, and I think it's Chigozi. Please, if I pronounced your name wrong, I'm sorry. But if an individual can be trained, does it go to say individual resilience rubs off on the team's resilience? In other words, how does individual resilience affect the team resilience? And I think you touched on it a little bit there, with somebody's energy can help the rest of the team, obviously, right? But anything further you would add to that?
I think it's, yes, I think that's a good perspective. And the two go like this, they mix together. So if my resilience is higher, my individual resilience, I'm going to show up with a different mindset, perhaps, than somebody who doesn't have a great resilience. And so at that point, then we begin to knock on the team piece. And so within that perseverance, the person whose resilience is low might be on the line of, this is pointless. Why don't we just give up? Whereas I'll have a different energy. So that can affect our team resilience. But I think the key piece to recognize from this, especially for our leaders who are in here, is those 7 components of team resilience are different and need working on. We've got to have radars out on both of them, but we also have to put that responsibility of individual resilience with our people. Like, this is in your control. And so what are you doing to work on your own resilience as well? Yeah.
No, I like that. And I think it touches on something that Jacqueline had here in the chat and the question. And then Leah, I'll get to your next question. But Jacqueline's comment here is, I'm seeing a struggle with having the bulk of our team functioning and being resilient. But we've got one team member that doesn't seem to be coming along, and it's weighing the team down. So this is kind of the reverse, positive energy, building resilience. How do you balance an investment of time with the team members when one person seems to be diverting 80% of time and energy, a disruptor to the team resilience dynamic? I like that phrase, team resilience dynamic. Yeah. Thoughts on that one?
So that's always going to depend on the person that we're talking about. And so a couple of thoughts. One, what's going on for them? So if there's just one within this, are they your passionate critic? And if they are your passionate critic, where have they been disappointed before that they want to play that role? And are they aware of the impact that they're having on the rest of the team? That's a conversation, leader, employee, quiet conversation between the two of them. The other piece that shows up there, if the rest of the team are doing really well, that team resiliency dynamic is good, one person is sort of wavering in there, what's going on behind the scenes? If there's just one, there's chances are there's something up there. And if their individual resilience is low, there may be a story, there may be a piece that you're not aware of. And it's their right not to tell you that, but it is also your right to check in. I noticed that as a team, we're doing really well here. And it feels to me that something's off kilter. Do you need some help? Or, you know, whatever that question looks like in the chemistry that you have with that person. Yeah. We come back to, again, you get what you tolerate. So if you're not asking or having the conversations, that dynamic's going to carry on. And it is toxic, unfortunately. There's one more too. And if you've got somebody that's just purposely being a jerk, I think that's appropriate to say on here. That's a decision and a different conversation too.
100%, right? You know, and hopefully it's not the first one that you go to, but so Leah, your question is, where do team dynamics fall into your model of resilience? I think we've somewhat touched on this a little bit. For example, do you think a team that struggles with interpersonal conflict or that do not trust their leader, it's an interesting one, can exhibit team resilience, or do you think that these dynamics need to be managed in order to be resilient in times of crisis?
Yes. So I think when we look at it, when we go that way, we're going into a big conversation. But if we look at one of those components was connection. And even when we look at perseverance, we look at capability as well. If you don't trust your leader, then those three components are going to be really, really hard. So I'm going to suggest that your team actually won't be doing that well with resiliency. Because if you don't trust your leader, you're not going to say, hey, we could match up with this department, or we could cross-function here and bring in some of their expertise and learn much quicker. But if you don't trust your leader in that process, you're not going to come up with those different ideas. You're not going to lean on, what does Simon Sinek call them? Those worthy rivals, like, you know, who our competitors are, what can we learn from them? Those kind of out there ideas aren't going to come up really quickly.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah. Although you may, if the team is aligned enough in their distrust of the leader, they may become resilient together in their work against the leader, but that's a totally different.
That's a whole different conversation right there.
A whole different one, right? Leah, you're throwing a resource in here, folks. I'm not sure if you see it in the chat, but thank you for that. It's, as Leah calls it, an amazing evidence-based resource that's free from the U of C. We're happy to promote our friends over at the U of C. It's not a resilience specific measure, but many components of resilience that Jenny is talking about. So thank you for that. So we're kind of coming into the end here, but I wanted to chat a little bit. Some of the tools, and this is one of those surprise questions that I throw at Jenny here. This for me is kind of a bit of a rapid check around some strategies I've read about with respect to checking in with your team, building resiliency. So I think you kind of touched on this concept of temperature checks with your team, right? At the start of the meeting, where's everybody's energy at, right? And I think that one, if you haven't done it, we've started trying to do it lately on our team, and the first intentional steps with it may feel awkward, but I think if you're committed to it and you talk about why you're doing it, I think that is a great one. Dana has put a 2-word check-in on a chat works great. I'm curious on that one. Is it, is that as simple as saying feel great, or is it literally you're doing a check-in with your group and having everybody respond with 2 words to?
So when I run the 2-word check-in,
okay.
I would do it verbally. Dana's absolutely right. You can run it in a chat as well. And my version of that is you have 2 words, 1 word that describes the very best of what's going on for you at the moment, and 1 word that describes the very worst of what's going on for you at the moment. And the promise is no questions, no explanations required. And then we on screen, I would say, who'd like to kick us off? And Craig, you would say, yay, me. And then your job is you throw it to the next person. So you choose who'll go next, and we go around the entire screen. And so what you hear things like, I might say to you, my 2 words are excitement and frustration. And that's it, we're done. And I would suggest as leaders that rather than staring into your camera, you're actually looking at the people on the screen, because there's some body language, there's some cues, there's some nuances that if you pick up something that is your window later. You know, I promise no questions, no stories, but I did notice the second word was harder. Are you doing okay? Yep, I'm fine. Okay. Like, but you have that opportunity to ask at that point. It's really quick, and it's actually a really good energy builder as well because of and when teams get good at it, it moves with a quick speed around the screen as well. So there's one way to do it. As Dana said, you can run it in the chat, but I like everybody to hear their own voice, like unmute, get that voice out there, and now we're a bit more comfortable chatting on the screen.
Cool. I like that. Hey, I walked away learning something today. That's cool. I've never used that one before. So another one I've read about are candor breaks. So everybody gets an opportunity to pull the moment to say, we need a candor break to talk about the elephant in the room here.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on that one?
In that, you got to have the psychological safety first off for people to do that talking always. And what did I came across one the other day? Elephants, stinky fish, and something else. Can't remember what the else was. There was another one, and they used a collaboration board. So they're working virtually. They had maybe a Jamboard or a mural board, and people put their post-its up. What are the elephants in the room? The stinky fish are the ones that you believe as the leader we're done with, but they're still around and they're kicking up a stink, and you're not aware of that. So you think it's closed, your team are like, yeah, no, we're not done talking about this.
Yeah.
And so get that up there. And then there was one more, I'd have to go look it up to see what the one more was. And by doing that, that collaboration board and putting the post-it notes up, there is an offer for anybody and everyone to put their thoughts up there. I don't know exactly how it works on Jamboard, but Mural, definitely you can log in without a name, so you can make it anonymous in that space. And then that allows you as a leader to say, whoa, I wasn't even aware of that elephant. Is anybody willing to talk about it right here, right now in the room? Now, if you get silence, that's telling you something straight away between your dynamics. But it also offers you the invitation to say, okay, this is important. It's an elephant in the room. And I promise you confidentiality, reach out to me later today. And then keep that confidentiality within the realms of what they give you. And yes, I mean, those are the pieces that really allow us to build that team, that cohesion part.
There you go. Interesting. Sean, as a follow-up on the two-word check-in, do you find it can be the two-word check-in verbally can be skewed with shy people?
Sean, it's not my experience, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen. I find people like it because it is just 2 words, and that's easier. And the promise of no questions, and that's rigid. No questions, no stories in that round. We just move around. I might sometimes, if I know somebody's struggling, I might say thank you, and then who would you like to throw it to? It tends to work. It does tend to work.
Cool. All right, we're coming up at 8:45 here, Jenny. So why don't we kind of wrap up with our normal big idea?
Let's get there.
A couple applied strategies and 3 questions for folks.
So get to the right slide first of all. It's always a relief when that works. There we go.
There you go.
I've already
and sorry, folks, for those of you asking, yes, the slides, for those of you that have attended, the slides will be made available. So.
And you'll get some extras too. I always create some slides, and if we talk about them, they come as well, even though you don't see them. Jenny and PowerPoint don't go that well together, but you will get those extra thoughts in there too. So our big idea, we've mentioned this already, you can have individual resilience is different than team resilience. So recognizing both of them builds us to be stronger. The takeaways, I tried to think of things that leaders could take and do with their teams straight away. So we didn't talk about this too much. It aligns with alignment, and comes from Steve Bull, who actually was a professor of mine when I was at university, but I really like this exercise. So with your teams, and you can do it by post-it notes, you can do it by collaboration, you can do it by straight out conversation, but 4 questions there that you can ask your team. I love it when it's done roundtable with an intact team and everybody talks about their role. Role conflict is one of lack of role clarity is one of the greatest causes of conflict. So having these conversations really help us to figure that piece out. So there's one that you can take with your team and have those conversations. And then the second one that you can take away is all to do with that sort of perseverance and that energy piece. So we can build this one strength or one connection at a time. So we didn't talk about this too much, but do you know what your team's strengths are? Does your team know what their team's strengths are? And we spend a lot of time focusing on what we're not good at, where we need to get better.
Yeah.
Let's flip that conversation and talk about what we are good and how good at and how we can build that. Strengths are energy building and they don't suck the energy out of us when we get to lean in on them. Social capital, lots of you have heard me talk about this a lot, but I cannot, like, the importance of it is just crucial. So are you building it every day? What kind of time are you making to invest in getting to know your people? And not just you and them, but them and them as well. And are you spreading that? Are you getting to know other people as well? Connection, connection, connection. And then this last one, see people, like authentically see people. It's harder when we're virtual, but, you know, answer the team's message, reach out and say hello, use people's names, validate and recognize them in meetings. It is incredible what 5 seconds of your time to take notice does to somebody's day, even to their week. And so if we could each inject 2 or 3 more drops of that in a day, I think we would have an incredible difference across the people that we work with and the people within our fold. And then 3 questions, as always, that we will leave you with to noodle, contemplate. Potentially, you're always welcome to reach out to us as well. In a moment, we'll have how you can do that. But there's the 3 that I would leave you with today.
Excellent.
There you go.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And I know there's a couple of questions we didn't get to. We'll follow up on those in the follow-up materials. We're back in 2 weeks. We will be off next week, chatting about social intelligence in 2 weeks. And then we've got 2 sessions the following week. One is on ESG for leaders, a very interesting one-off kind of conversation that we're having. Then the 26th, the topic has totally slipped my mind in this moment. So there you go. I will remember that. But and then December 5th, we will also be back with inclusive leadership, looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you so much. If you've got any questions, our email addresses are there. Have a fantastic weekend. And we look forward to seeing everybody again in about 2 weeks. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Enjoy your weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.